July 8, 2014. The Estadio Mineirão, Belo Horizonte, Brazil. 200 million people are watching. Not just watching a football match, watching a nation hold its breath. Brazil, the most decorated football country on earth, is 90 minutes away from a World Cup final, on home soil. What happened next wasn't just a football result, it was the moment the beautiful game's most beautiful nation shattered. But to understand how Brazil fell this far, you first have to understand how high they once stood. Football didn't just grow in Brazil. It was born there, in the streets of São Paulo and Rio, in favelas where the pitch was concrete and the ball was whatever you could find. It was a language, a religion, an identity. In 1958, a 17-year-old boy walked onto a World Cup stage in Sweden and introduced the world to something it had never seen before. His name was Edson Arantes do Nascimento. The world called him Pelé. He scored 6 goals in that tournament. Brazil won the World Cup, and an era began. 4 years later in Chile, they won it again, this time without Pelé, who was injured. The world expected Brazil to crumble. They didn't. Because Brazil wasn't one player. Brazil was a philosophy. They called it Jogo Bonito, the beautiful game. It wasn't about winning ugly. It was about winning beautifully, as if the score was secondary to the art. Then came 1970, Mexico, the greatest Brazil team ever assembled. Pelé, Jairzinho, Rivelino, Tostão, Carlos Alberto. They didn't just win the World Cup, they redefined what football could be. That goal in the final against Italy, Carlos Alberto, receiving a perfectly weighted pass from Pelé, crashing it into the net, is still considered the greatest team goal in football history. Brazil scored 19 goals in that tournament, conceded 7, and lifted the Jules Rimet trophy permanently because 3 World Cup wins meant you kept it forever. They weren't just a team, they were the standard, the measuring stick every other nation was judged against. For decades, football had one question: can anyone play like Brazil? But glory has a cost. When you reach the summit the way Brazil did, the only direction left is down. In 1982, Brazil came to Spain with what many called their most talented squad since 1970. Zico, Socrates, Falcão, Éder. Poets with boots on. They played breathtaking football, and they lost to Italy in the second round. Paolo Rossi scored a hat trick. Brazil were out. The philosophy of beauty over results had cost them everything. But the scars of 1982 weren't just about that tournament. They planted a question that would haunt Brazil for decades. Is Jogo Bonito enough anymore? By 1990, Brazil had changed. More pragmatic, more defensive, less beautiful. They were knocked out by Argentina, Maradona threading a pass through their defense, a moment that felt like an insult to everything Brazil stood for. Behind the scenes, something was rotting. The Brazilian Football Confederation, the CBF, had become a machine of corruption and self-interest. Administrators who couldn't play football were making decisions about football. Sponsors started influencing squad selections. Politics crept into the dressing room. But for a while, the talent was so extraordinary, it covered the cracks. In 1994, Romário and Bebeto brought Brazil back to the summit. A World Cup in America, a penalty shootout final against Italy, and Brazil back on top of the world. Then, 2002. Perhaps the last time Brazil truly felt like Brazil, Ronaldo, who had nearly died 4 years earlier, collapsing before a World Cup final in France, returned to score twice in the final against Germany. It felt like a fairy tale. It was also, though none of them knew it then, the last chapter of one. After 2002, Brazil's decline was slow. Invisible at first, then impossible to ignore. In 2006, they had Ronaldinho, the best player on the planet, Kaká, Roberto Carlos, Adriano. On paper, one of the greatest squads in history. In reality, Zidane's France knocked them out in the quarterfinals. Ronaldinho, who could make stadiums gasp with a single touch, disappeared in that tournament. The world's best player, invisible when it mattered most. 2010, South Africa. Again, Brazil had the talent. Kaká, Luis Fabiano, Robinho. Again, they fell in the quarterfinals, this time to the Netherlands, back-to-back quarterfinal exits. For any other nation, acceptable. For Brazil, a scandal. But the real scandal wasn't on the pitch. Behind closed doors, the CBF was unraveling. Corruption scandals, financial mismanagement, a national federation more interested in politics than football. And the talent pipeline, once the envy of the world, was beginning to dry up. Brazil had always survived on an endless stream of genius. Pelé gave way to Zico, Zico to Romario, Romario to Ronaldo, Ronaldo to Ronaldinho. But after Ronaldinho, there was only one name: Neymar, a 20-year-old from Mogi das Cruzes, electric, gifted, joyful, everything Brazil football should be. But one player cannot carry the weight of 200 million people. Nobody told him that. When Brazil won the right to host the 2014 World Cup, the reaction wasn't pure celebration. It was complicated. Millions of Brazilians took to the streets, not against football, against a government spending billions on stadiums while hospitals crumbled and schools fell apart. The World Cup, once a source of national pride, had become a fault line. And the team that was supposed to unite the country now felt like it was being used by it. Neymar became a symbol of both hope and pressure. Every billboard, every commercial, every front page. His face was Brazil's face. And somewhere deep in the Brazilian Football Federation, someone made a quiet, dangerous decision. Build the entire World Cup campaign around one man. The tournament began. Brazil played with fear, not the carefree genius of 1970, not even the pragmatic efficiency of 1994. Just fear. They scraped past Croatia in the opener, survived penalties against Chile, needed a late goal to beat Cameroon. They were winning, but nobody was convinced. Then came Colombia. David Luiz scored one of the great World Cup free kicks. Brazil won 2-1, and then Juan Zuniga's knee into Neymar's spine, a fractured vertebra. Brazil's talisman, their captain, their messiah, was gone. The country held a vigil, fans outside his hotel chanting his name, the president tweeting prayers. And in the dressing room, 11 men suddenly realized something terrifying. We don't know how to do this without him. July 8th, Belo Horizonte, Germany in the semifinals. Before the game even began, the Brazilian players held up Neymar's jersey. Some were already crying. The captain, Thiago Silva, was suspended. The leader, gone. The talisman, gone. What walked out onto that pitch wasn't Brazil. It was a nation's grief wearing yellow jerseys. 11 minutes. Germany score. The crowd went silent, not the angry silence of a team fighting back. The hollow silence of people watching something collapse. 23 minutes, 2-0, 24 minutes, 3-0, 26 minutes, 4-0, 2 goals in 2 minutes. The Brazilian defenders looked at each other, not with tactical awareness, with confusion, with shame, like men who had forgotten where they were. 29 minutes, 5-0. 5 goals in 18 minutes. In the stands, people were weeping, not the tears of a narrow defeat, the tears of something fundamental breaking, a belief system collapsing in real time. At halftime, 5-0, in a World Cup semifinal, at home. The second half was merciful only in its brevity. Germany scored 2 more. Brazil scored 1, a consolation so hollow it almost made things worse. Final score: Brazil 1. Germany 7, the worst defeat in Brazilian World Cup history. The worst result ever for a host nation in a semifinal. The heaviest defeat any team has ever suffered at that stage of the tournament. They called it O Mineirazo, echoing the Maracanazo of 1950. A new word for a new wound. In the days that followed, the recriminations were brutal. Romario, the 1994 World Cup hero, now a politician, called for the heads of the CBF executives. "Our football has been deteriorating for years," he said. "It is being dragged down by leaders who don't even have the talent to juggle a ball." 2 years later, the CBF president José María Marín would be arrested by the FBI as part of FIFA's global corruption scandal. He had been sitting in his box, watching that 7-1. Brazil haven't reached a World Cup final since 2002. In 2018, quarterfinals, out. In 2022, quarterfinals, out. Neymar, the player an entire system was built around, has spent more time injured than on the pitch in recent years. And yet, in the streets of São Paulo and Rio, in the favelas where the pitch is still concrete and the ball is still whatever you can find, children are still playing. Because Brazil's story isn't over. It's just in one of its darker chapters. The 5 stars on that yellow shirt represent 5 times Brazil conquered the world. What July 8, 2014 proved is that greatness, no matter how deep it runs, can never be taken for granted. Not by a federation, not by a nation, not by anyone. This was the story football never fully told you. Subscribe. There are more stories where this came from.